My mom and dad had me because my big brother Jimmy had multiple organ failure, and over the years, they did illegal surgeries to transplant my organs to keep my brother alive. Just as they were about to take my heart, I managed to escape. But my mom and dad, sometimes I don't know where to start when telling my life story. It's as if it has no beginning. Some people talk about their childhood and say, I was so happy back then. I can't say that. Because even the moments we'd call happy in my childhood were always shadowed by something. Still, I have to tell you how it all began. Otherwise, you won't understand why I still wake up at 5 a.m., why I can't breathe when I see a crowd, or why I can't help but watch my children while they sleep. I'm Rachel. I'm 28 years old now, married, and have 3 children. On paper, I have a normal life, but normal. Yes, that word has always sounded strange to me. Because I never knew what normal was. My mother was a pediatrician. She was always walking around in her white coat, a stethoscope around her neck, coffee in hand. To people, she was sweet, helpful, and knowledgeable. My father was a surgeon, calm, authoritative, strict but distant with his patients. From the outside, they looked like the perfect couple in the medical world. But when the door to our home closed, that perfect picture would crack a little. Not much, just small fractures, but even as a child, I could feel that something was seeping through them. The first child in the family was Jimmy. The first time I met him, or rather, the first memory I have of him wasn't even from when I was alive. I know from photos, blonde, always smiling, full of energy. Everybody's favorite. Relatives, neighbors, my mother's friends, everyone adored him. He was their little genius, the future doctor. My father's eyes would shine with pride when he held Jimmy's hand and showed him the stethoscope, saying, "My son will grow up to be a surgeon like me." But when Jimmy turned 3, everything changed. At first, he just seemed a bit tired. When we went to the park, he couldn't run as much as before, and he would be out of breath. My mother initially thought these were normal childhood ailments. "We'll give him some vitamin supplements. It'll pass," she said, or rather, that's what she told me much later. But then the bruises started. Mysterious dark patches on his legs and arms. Then came the constant fever. I don't remember the details from that time directly, because I wasn't even in the world yet. But years later, in my mother's pregnancy journal and in some reports my father kept, I saw just how fast and terrifying it all unfolded. Jimmy was diagnosed with multiple organ failure. For a small child, that means the slow breakdown of every system in the body. For my mother and father, time stopped at that moment. Jimmy was their firstborn, and the possibility of losing him. I think they couldn't even accept the thought. They first went to the best hospitals and the most expensive doctors. With my father's connections in the medical world, they did everything they could. But soon they realized that Jimmy's survival wouldn't be possible with just medicine or minor operations. Needed an organ transplant, not just one, but multiple. And government institutions, donor lists, waiting times. None of it would be fast enough for Jimmy's dwindling time. For me, this is where the story begins to darken. Because they said they were ready to do anything to keep Jimmy alive. And when you say anything, sometimes you also put your humanity on the table. When Jimmy's illness was confirmed and my parents realized how slow the state's organ transplant lists moved, they began looking for other ways. I learned about this part years later. Back then, I hadn't even been born yet. But every decision they made would directly lead to my existence. At first, they tried adoption. You know how in some stories, you hear about giving an orphan a home, saving that child's life and helping someone else at the same time. But this story didn't begin so sweetly. They didn't want to raise a child with love. They saw a child as new organs for Jimmy, even saying that makes my stomach turn. Because to them, from the very beginning, I wasn't a sister but a resource. But at the time, I wasn't even conceived. I had no awareness. The adoption process involved health checks and psychological evaluations. From what I understand, my parents were not very good at pretending. In the medical world, they might have been trusted and respected, but in front of the social workers at the adoption agency, They couldn't hide their real intentions. Their file was closed as unsuitable. And that was when the path to me opened. My parents said, if we can't bring one from the outside, we'll make one ourselves. And my mother decided to get pregnant. Up until then, my mother hadn't actually wanted more children. She thought one was enough, but that idea changed overnight. In a household where my father was a surgeon and my mother a pediatrician, topics like biology, genetics, and blood compatibility were things discussed at the dinner table. Even before I was conceived, they had planned which of my organs would be compatible with Jimmy's. When I learned this years later, I felt something that's hard to describe, as if my own life had never belonged to me. Before I even took a breath, before I saw the world, my purpose had already been decided not to live, but to keep someone else alive, and that someone was only Jimmy. When I was born, Jimmy was still sick. His room was the quietest, most sterile place in the house. There was always the sound of a machine in the background. As a baby, I don't remember Jimmy looking into my eyes and smiling because he was too tired back then. Still, sometimes he would glance at me, and my mother would say, "Look, this is your sister." To me, he was just someone lying in a big bed, skin pale, eyes wide open. In my early years, I can say they treated me well because I was still small and my organs were developing. But now I know that this kindness was fake. They were only waiting for me to grow. And when that day came, I don't remember my first surgery. I was too young. But I have small, faint scars in certain places on my body. Those scars remind me of everything. At first, they took non-vital, smaller parts. A kidney, a piece of my liver, blood transfusions. Each time, Jimmy's condition seemed to improve a little, but then it would get worse again. As I grew, the surgeries increased, and every time they would say, "This is the last one, Rachel. We promise this is the last," but it never was. As his organs failed one by one, mine were used like spare parts, and the hardest part. By the time I was 15, Jimmy's heart could no longer keep going. My father was very quiet this time. My mother, though. She walked around with a strange calm, as if the decision had already been made. They wanted my heart, and even then, I wanted to live. That's when I ran away, after being a child locked inside for years. What happened when I took my first step outside is a whole different story. Whenever I think about that day, the same old knot still forms in my throat. The day I ran away from home, I actually hadn't meant to run. It wasn't planned because I didn't know how to make plans. My whole life, I had been programmed to follow instructions step by step, day by day. That morning, when I woke up, I noticed the house was quieter than usual. My mother wasn't in the kitchen. I couldn't hear my father's footsteps. Not even the hum of the machine from Jimmy's room. A strange emptiness grew inside me, as if everyone had gone somewhere and I had been left behind like a forgotten object. I stepped out of my room. The doors at the end of the hallway were open. The house felt deserted. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. Then I realized the front door wasn't locked. As far as I knew, that had never happened before. I held the doorknob longer than I ever had in my life. And then, without thinking, I just opened the door. My first breath nearly choked me. I mean it. The air outside did smell. Its thickness, its coolness made my nose sting. After the sterile, artificial air in the house, the scent was almost overwhelming. Earth, grass, a faint whiff of gasoline. It filled my nose and made my head spin. The sunlight hit my eyes so sharply that I closed them reflexively. But even behind my eyelids, there were waves of orange and red. After years behind curtains, real daylight felt like something that could burn. I took a step, then another. When my feet touched the concrete, I felt the hardness of the ground. That was the moment I realized there really was a world outside the house. The first person I saw was an old woman looking at me from a window in the apartment across the street. The way she looked at me, I still don't know if it was fear, surprise, or a mix of both. Then a door shut, and within 10 minutes, I heard a siren in the distance. It was the first time I'd ever heard a siren in real life. I'd seen them in movies, But the real sound, the vibration, the echo, that high-pitched wail made me think my heart was going to leap out of my chest. Two men in blue uniforms approached. They had radios in their hands and expressions that seemed to be trying to understand. One of them bent down to my level. His mouth moved, but I couldn't understand the words. It was as if my ears were blocked. The words didn't reach me. I suddenly realized I could only hear my own breathing, fast, short, ragged. I shook my head, thinking they didn't understand me, but they kept speaking. One of them reached out his hand. I stepped back. Then I noticed people gathering behind me. Dozens of eyes staring at me, women, men, children. All of them suddenly seemed huge in my vision. Seeing so many people at once, my brain couldn't process it, and at that moment, I collapsed to the ground. They put me in a vehicle. It was cold inside. The windows were small. As I looked outside, everything I saw was strange trees, traffic lights, people walking their dogs. It all felt like it belonged to another planet. When we arrived at the police station, a woman gave me a blanket. Then someone sat across from me. I later learned she was a psychologist. Her eyes were gentle, her voice different from the others. She asked me questions. At first, I couldn't answer. It was as if I had forgotten how to speak. But then, a word came out of my mouth. Rachel, I said my name. Maybe for the first time in my life, I had expressed my own identity. And after that, the words slowly began to flow. When the psychologist told me I was safe, everything I had been holding in 4 years spilled from my lips. When what I told them echoed in that room, everyone fell silent, the police officers, the social workers, even the people waiting outside the door. Because what I described wasn't the kind of thing they had seen in movies. It was real, and it was horrifying. What I told in the psychologist's office wasn't just written in her notebook. That day, it unlocked every closed door in my life. Everything I had hidden, everything I had kept silent about, everything I had looked away from. It all came spilling out. Sometimes my words got caught in my throat. Sometimes I had to pause to take a breath. But every time I fell silent, the determined look in her eyes told me, keep going. One of the police officers listening to me, I still remember his name. Morai had his head bowed. The social worker beside me had her hands tightly clasped on her knees. No one told me, you're exaggerating. No one said, maybe you're remembering it wrong. Because what I described was so detailed, so vivid, that it would have been impossible for me to make it up. I told them everything from the small surgical scars in a child's room to the cold metallic smell before an operation. The rustle of my mother's gloves, the blank look on my father's face, the rhythmic beeping of the machines in Jimmy's room. Everyone's expression changed in that room. It was as if, all at once, the mask of that sterile, respectable doctor couple had fallen away. That same day, they took me to a children's protection institution. You're safe here, they said. But that night, I couldn't sleep. My bed was too far from the wall, the ceiling too high. Jimmy wasn't there, the house wasn't there. In that cold, silent room, even though I knew I was free for the first time, I felt as if I was floating in empty space. The next day, the legal process began. Of course, I was a child, so I didn't understand most of it at the time. But my lawyer explained it to me slowly. Your mother and father had you for the purpose of organ harvesting. There are medical documents to prove it. The transplants they performed were illegal. This is a serious crime. I will never forget the first day I appeared in court. A huge hall, dim lighting, the smell of wood. My mother and father sat across from me. When my mother saw me, she looked away. My father looked at me, but there was nothing in his eyes. No remorse, no love, no anger, just an entirely blank face. As the judge read through the evidence in the file, I kept thinking to myself, this is my life. But those words didn't carry the same weight for anyone else in that room. For them, it was a case file. For me, it was every single day I'd lived. The hearings went on 4 weeks. With each development, I understood a little more. I hadn't been brought into this world to be saved. I had been brought here to save Jimmy, and Jimmy. He wasn't guilty. He, too, had been born into this family without a choice. But by the end of that year, while the trial was still ongoing, Jimmy died of heart failure. When I heard the news, I felt a strange emptiness. Part of me thought, now no one can hurt me anymore. Another part of me thought, he, too, lived and died without ever getting to choose. I didn't go to his funeral. I didn't want to. My mother and father were sentenced to life in prison. As they were being led out of the courtroom, my mother looked at me one last time. Her lips moved, but I didn't hear what she said. Maybe she said, "I'm sorry." Maybe nothing at all. My father didn't even turn his head. From that day on, I was no longer their daughter. My name and surname stayed on official documents, but in my heart, I was completely cut off. The state placed me under protection, and I spent years in different institutions and foster families. In every new home, I learned a little more about how to live normally, but my past always walked quietly behind me. And years later, when I turned 18, all of their wealth was transferred into my bank account. When I saw the amount, my hands trembled. That money had blood on it. But with it, I went to university, built my own life, and found the strength to bury my past. The years I spent under state protection. Looking back now, they were the strangest, most complicated years of my life. On one hand, I was safe, no one could hurt me anymore. On the other hand, I didn't know whom to trust. It took me a long time to get used to the idea that people could be good. The first institution I stayed in was a large building, with grey walls and old, peeling paint in the hallways. Inside, the sound of children's voices echoed. Some were older than me, some younger, most carried their own stories with them. Some were orphans, some had been abandoned, some like me had escaped a different kind of trauma. I didn't speak during the first weeks. In the cafeteria, I would just stare at the food on my tray, and even while eating, I felt as if someone was watching me. My hands were always in my lap, my back always to the wall. The social workers there approached me with patience. No one forced me to talk. Maybe that's why, a few months later, I started answering some of them with a few words. Over the years, I stayed with different foster families. Some genuinely cared for me. Others took me in only for the financial support the state provided. In one home, I had my first birthday cake. When it came time to blow out the candles, I didn't know what to wish for because until then, I'd never even thought about the concept of a wish. In another home, I was scolded simply for coming home late from school. That's when I realized that not every house labeled family meant safety. Still, I met good people, too, people who read me books patiently, who wrapped my scarf tightly around my neck in the cold of winter, who took me to the park in summer. Thanks to them, I slowly began to accept the idea that I could trust people again. School became both an escape and a new world for me. Sitting in the same row with other children, doing homework, running in the yard during recess. All of it was foreign to me, yet fascinating. For the first time, I played games with children my own age. For the first time, when someone called me my friend, something inside me saw fun. When I turned 18, I remember the state handing me a bank card. At first, I didn't understand. Then I learned that all the property left by my mother and father had been transferred to me. Seeing the amount, I felt a rush of mixed emotions. Part of me said, I don't want this money. Another part whispered, this is my chance to start over. I used that money to go to university. I studied psychology because I wanted to understand why people did such things, and how children could be protected. In class, I sometimes wanted to use my own story as an example, but I stayed quiet. I just took notes, read, and learned. The year one graduated from university, someone came into my life. His name was Daniel. When I met him, I still carried the belief that people will hurt you eventually, but he waited patiently. He gave me time. He let me trust at my own pace. And one day, I realized that when I was with him, I wasn't on guard anymore. That's when we decided to get married. Now, I'm 28 years old. I have 3 children. When I hold them, I try to give them the warmth I never had in my own childhood. In our home, there are no shouting matches, no threats, no operating tables. Just spilled cereal at breakfast, a rubber duck forgotten in the bathroom, and the sound of bedtime stories in the evenings. My past is still with me. Sometimes, at night, I catch the scent of my old house in my sleep. Sometimes, walking through a hospital corridor makes my chest tighten. But those memories no longer control me. They are just shadows of the past. And I, Rachel, I am no longer just a survivor. I am a builder of life.